In the age of coronavirus, the internet has become more crucial than ever for working families. But many of our communities can't get high-speed internet at all. Next month, the FCC begins phase 1 of a $16 billion plan to wire up more rural areas. But today we find out what happened to the billions of tax dollars already spent for that purpose. Life in the Virginia countryside comes with beauty, serenity, and for some, a big drawback: no high-speed internet.
I don't have any internet at my house at all because my house, unfortunately, is a spot that is a dead zone for cell phones.
Kim Mannion is a fourth-grade teacher at Millboro Elementary in Bath County, Central Virginia. To do any work online, she has to go to school or hot spots in parking lots. Same for about a quarter of her students.
They are still missing out because the bottom line is the other kids are learning how to be familiar with technological devices.
It has to do with the bottom line, how far they have to lay a line and how much it would cost to reach just one house. There are more than 18 million Americans without high-speed internet. Companies like AT&T, Comcast, and Verizon won't spend the money it takes to lay cable or fiber optic lines to relatively few customers. That's where customer-owned co-ops are entering the picture. Here in Virginia, it's the Bath, Allegheny, and Rockbridge Counties Electric Cooperative, or BARC. BARC installer Dustin Wallace says a lot of houses out this way have only satellite internet, if anything, slow and expensive. You're too young to remember, but in the old days, we had to dial up on a modem.
I remember at my grandpa's house.
Wait for the connection to clear.
Yeah, I remember it perfectly clear at my grandpa's house.
So some people aren't too far past that.
No, it's
today.
Actually, it's pretty similar.
Today, he's bringing a better connection to Bob Williams. What is the new service going to allow you to do?
Well, overall, it's going to save a lot of money in monthly fees, but in this process, we're going to get faster, more reliable internet service than we've had.
A few miles up the road is Keith Swisher's beef, cattle, and grain farm.
I started out with dial-up, and then we went from dial-up to, I believe we went next to the satellite. And it was also frustratingly slow that I almost gave up on using the internet.
What types of things would happen if you tried to do something?
Well, if you tried to open a newspaper, a lot of times it would time out and just cut off before it would ever load. And it's so frustrating to try to look up something, for parts or information. It just took forever.
The fact is, to some, access to the internet is becoming as vital as electric power.
The poles went up. The wires were strung.
The federal government helped bring power to the rural South in the 1930s.
And there was light. Yes, there was light. But more than just the light of illumination.
Anybody living outside of the towns or the cities didn't have power. So co-ops were formed to bring power to those areas.
Mike Kaiser is CEO of BARC Electric Cooperative.
70, 80 years later, here we are basically doing the exact same thing with broadband, getting loans from the federal government to bring, and grants to bring broadband out to people that are unserved because it's not profitable for for-profit companies to do that.
So do you know anything about when the electric came in and how that worked?
Oh, I've heard my father speak of it often. It was put in 1938. And they were very welcoming to have electricity finally in this area.
Did you say you think your grandfather or some of the other farmers around here helped with that?
Yes.
Tell me about
when
that.
When the construction of the lines came through and when it passed individuals' property, they would go out and help the people put the poles in, string the wire. They were that eager to have electricity out here.
It's not easy or cheap. Here, BARC crews are rolling out fiber optic cables along the existing telephone poles. This part of the labor alone would cost the equivalent of $5,000 per household. But since the BARK Co-op is a not-for-profit and customers are the owners, BARK pays the upfront costs and gets paid back by the monthly customer payments over many years. With so many millions still disconnected, the Federal Communications Commission is spending $20.4 billion over the next 10 years to help bring fast internet to more unserved areas. Phase 1 of the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund in October makes $16 billion available. A lot of the money will go to co-ops like BARK. So is it fair to say you think there should be more accountability of this federal money that's going out the door to companies that are supposedly serving more people with internet?
Absolutely.
Ajit Pai is chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. He says under the 2009 stimulus bill, billions of dollars went to giant internet providers to connect rural residents. But today, we don't know how many people actually got the benefit. Is there a way to quantify how much money these big companies have gotten and how many people they really have served, or how much internet has been brought to rural areas?
Unfortunately, we know that billions went out the door, but there was not accountability on the back end. These companies didn't have to report how they were using these subsidies to deploy broadband infrastructure. So under my administration, what we've done is to create an online database where these carriers that receive subsidies going forward have to register the exact geocoded locations where they're providing service. If they miss these metrics that we've provided for them over the course of the years, they have to pay some of the money back potentially and be subject to enforcement action.
Do you expect that these organizations called co-ops will play a larger role maybe than they have in the past in receiving these funds and wiring up rural areas?
Absolutely. If you're willing to do the job, then you're eligible for this funding. So I hope the co-ops will play a big part in this.
BARK is getting $5.2 million in federal money over 10 years to help with the cost of connecting more than 2,500 homes.
In our case, we're passing every single electric member when we're done, so that's 13,000 there. Right now, I mean, we can't build it fast enough. Everybody wants it in every direction that we're going, inside and outside our territory.
Now Swisher has fast internet thanks to BARK. He can look up prices, order parts, check the news. Kim Mannion, the teacher, is on the waiting list, along with more than 18 million others still living a peaceful but largely disconnected life in the American countryside. And since our visit, we checked in. Teacher Kim Mannion is off the waiting list and now has broadband service at home. As coronavirus continues to surge around the country, what you see on the news tends to be the worst scenarios. But there are wide swaths of rural America that have had an entirely different experience. Today, we begin at one of the last places in the country to see its first case of COVID-19. And what stands out isn't how long the virus took to get there, but how they handled things once it arrived. It's bacon and eggs for breakfast at the one and only local cafe, where life looks pretty much like it has for most of the past few weeks, years, and even decades.
The town office is also a historic building.
Vicki Fix is mayor of Ekalaka, Montana, population somewhere a bit north of 300, 1,200 in the whole county. Founded around 1885.
It started by a man who wanted to build a saloon, and his wagon got stuck in the mud, and he said, well, this looks as good a place as any, and so he started a saloon.
As it happens, this old western town was one of the last places in America to get its first case of coronavirus. While much of the world saw alarming numbers starting last spring, it would be another 6 months before COVID-19 would find its way here.
I mean, this ain't the end of the world, but you can see it from here.
At the Wagon Wheel Cafe, the first people I talked to had recently caught and survived coronavirus.
I just got turned loose yesterday morning.
Did you think it was coming, though?
Oh, yeah, it's just like anything else. Our turn was coming.
My daughters called me and told me that I probably had it because they got it.
How'd you feel?
Just a slight cold with it. That was it.
Here in Ekalaka, by the time they finally got their very first case of coronavirus, they say they'd already learned a lot by watching what had happened everywhere else.
Like we were just kind of watching it because it didn't seem like ever real here. Not that it wasn't real, but we weren't like actually experiencing it. We weren't like going into big stores where everybody was wearing a mask everywhere and everybody was social distancing, you know. We were just still like our little town taking our own precautions, but it was nothing as big as like on the news, like what we saw everywhere else.
Rayleigh Montgomery says the community suffered greatly during the spring shutdown and watched the rest of the world suffer too.
The crisis in New York reaching a critical mass. Paramedics now empowered to make life and death decisions.
We were 6 months out from even having it close to our county, and we're locked down.
Sheriff Neil Kittleman also just got over a bout with COVID-19.
When it finally got here, then we could have shut down, but like I said, when it got here, people's already tired of the game.
Well, you know, at first they locked us down like everybody else. When we didn't have a case, we went on and on for quite a while. We were even doing our services online entirely for a few weeks.
At the First Baptist Church, Pastor Steve DeFord says after the spring closure, time passed, nobody got sick, and things eventually went back to normal. By the time coronavirus did rear its ugly head, they were determined to resist another shutdown. So unlike much of the rest of the country, they haven't missed a beat with in-person Sunday church.
I wanted to emphasize that. Any other prayer requests here this morning?
And would you say life is going on pretty much as it was?
Yeah, it's going on kind of as usual in a way. For one thing, we live in an agricultural ranching community, and I'm sorry, the animals have to be fed. Life has to go on. You can't just shut down the supplies that are needed to maintain those ranches, or you got to just keep moving, keep going.
Perhaps the most interesting story is what's happened with Ekalaka schools.
Yeah, in the beginning is when schools shut down, and like around here, like pretty much every family you find, there's going to be 4 to 6 kids, a lot. So it was tough on a lot of people to have all their kids home, and a lot of times people are at ranches, they don't have internet or anything, so it was really hard for us to access like schooling.
With schools shut down last spring, it was hard on everyone. Teachers and school employees made this video. When May came and they still didn't have a single case, they had their high school graduation ceremony.
You may remove your tassels. We're officially done with high school. Congratulations to the class of 2020 graduates.
We didn't own.
Stephen Eli is the high school principal and school superintendent. He moved here from Florida after the spring shutdown, just in time to deliberate a fall closing when coronavirus finally arrived.
The effect on the students here must have been dramatic in the spring because they were adamant. We had a board meeting where there was talk about not coming back to school for a few weeks. A majority of our students showed up and demanded that they be allowed to come to school. They didn't want to go home. They didn't want distance learning. They wanted to be at school. And they stood up and voiced their opinion in a very, very adult way. When some adults weren't being much adult about it, they were.
And so school went forward in Ekalaka. Even with coronavirus in town, they played a full fall of team sports.
When I had a chance to speak to our football team and to our girls volleyball team, I said, listen, you're blessed. Not everybody in this country is going to get to go out and play tonight. You guys get to. Don't ever think that, we're out here in Ekalaka, Montana, and nobody cares about us. Well, people care about you, and you need to be proud of the fact that you get to do this.
Teaching looks different here, too. Mrs. Sharon Carroll, the math teacher, is back now, but not long ago she was under quarantine after contact with someone who had coronavirus. Instead of shuttering the doors, they flipped the script. Kids still came to class.
Each number once and only once.
Here, she's actually speaking to the class from home through the TV monitor.
It's business as usual for the kids. It's been very seamless. It seems to be a whole lot easier for the one or two that have to be out to get into the classroom than just to say everybody's got to go and have a teacher in this room by themselves trying to get to all these homes. In this case, it's been very effective.
During our visit, about 80 people in the county of 1,200 had gotten COVID-19. And all in all, the townsfolk told us just because they're handling things differently doesn't mean they're not taking it seriously.
I think it's serious enough it killed people, so it's serious.
They just say every community has unique needs and should decide what's best for them.
Even our governor needed to just stay back and let the locals take care of the locals. That's the way the system's supposed to run.
We aren't reckless, we aren't careless. We ought to obviously try to practice good hygiene. We sanitize and do things like that around here. In the end, it's God who's going to protect us, and that's been primarily my focus.
When we visited, there had been 3 coronavirus deaths in Ekalaka, all in the local nursing home where they say everyone isolated, sterilized, and masked religiously. Wherever you stand on legalized marijuana, the idea has been gaining ground across the nation. America's most populous state, California, approved recreational pot starting in 2018 with the promise that a Shangri-La would emerge, generating a wealth of taxes and all but eliminating the shady criminal element. So far, that hasn't happened. The country's largest marijuana market is struggling in almost every category. Today, we investigate why.
Hello.
Hey.
How are you?
Excellent. Good seeing you.
Today, we're getting a most excellent tour of the Higher Path.
So this is your shop?
This is my shop.
A marijuana dispensary in Sherman Oaks, California.
Your online orders are here. You would check in, you'd wait in here, and then we'd invite you inside. And being invited inside usually turns into a fairly large retail space. We produce probably close to 100,000 joints a month here. We sell about 20 at our shop, and then 80,000 pretty much go to other suppliers. This is mostly manufacturing, packaging, and distribution. A lot of the stuff we do our own packaging.
Dream Queen.
And we package everything here. Dream Queen is a sativa. Everything in here is THC based.
Owner Jared Kylo also heads up the United Cannabis Business Association, representing pot retailers in California.
All right, have a lovely day, okay? So this is our entertainment space. Really, the goal of this is to turn this into a consumption lounge.
Fired up, bro.
Adjacent to his shop, we're invited to observe a taste test.
This is a 5 from me. Tasty.
California's green rush was supposed to begin in January 2018 when it first became legal to buy and use recreational pot.
All right, Bonnie, I have 159 for you.
The medical marijuana and illegal markets, which had operated with very little oversight, were supposed to come into the fold and generate major cash revenue. Officials said legal pot would ultimately generate $1 billion a year in taxes for the financially troubled state, which now has about $500 billion in state and local debt, give or take. But the actual results are proving to be a major bummer.
Well, I'm less than 0.1% profit margin currently, and I don't know any business that stays in business for those thin of margins.
3 years into California's legal pot experiment, the results haven't been quite as supporters predicted, and the state finds itself struggling with unexpected challenges that could serve as lessons for other states considering taking steps to make recreational marijuana legal.
I mean, it's been kind of a roller coaster, you know?
Alex Traverso is with the state agency that enforces the rules, the Bureau of Cannabis Control. What would you say are the successes of legalization so far?
I think the successes are that that now it's legalized, it's taxed, it's regulated. People aren't going to jail for it.
But he says much to the surprise of some, most California cities and counties have chosen to ban pot stores in their towns.
So out of the 483 cities and 58 counties, about 75% still don't allow retail storefronts.
And that's not the biggest issue.
What are some of the challenges that you've come across?
Yeah, I think the main challenges are still the illegal market. That's going to continue to be an issue for a number of years, similar to what we've seen in Colorado and other states that came before us.
11 states, most recently Illinois, have legalized recreational marijuana. Many report a simultaneous boom in the black market. It's estimated 75% of Californians are buying pot illegally, and 90% of the weed sold in 2018 in Massachusetts was illegal, as were more than half of sales in Oregon and Washington state. To understand why underground sales are thriving in states where pot is perfectly legal, just follow the money.
If you're a cultivator, you pay a tax. When you're a manufacturer, you pay a tax. And then once it gets to a distributor, you pay a tax. Then once it gets to the retailer pays a tax. Then the state takes its excise tax, which is based on gross receipts. Then you have like individual gross receipts tax at the city level.
In California, those on the growing and production side get taxed $1.35 for each ounce of fresh cannabis plants, $2.87 per ounce for leaves, and $9.65 per ounce of dried cannabis flowers. When it's ready to be sold to customers, add on a 15% state excise tax, a 7.25% state sales tax, and local sales taxes that can exceed 10%.
So after all is said and done, as a business owner, the final price of the product, about 58 to 60% of that price is taxes.
And there's a final, unexpected wrinkle that's emerged in California's legal marijuana industry: complaints about lack of diversity among pot business owners.
As we all know, prior to the legalization, you've talked about the folks who were arrested the most. It was black and brown individuals. But now,
California State Senator Stephen Bradford is among those who believe minorities should benefit more from legal pot.
70% of all arrests for possession or sale of marijuana was black and brown people. Now, on the reverse, less than 10% of people of color have a license for legalized marijuana, so that should be of a great concern to all of us here.
Yeah, this is the genetics that we have. The state allows us.
Bradford led a successful push to get over $40 million in state tax money dedicated to cannabis equity programs.
Some of the plants that we have here in this space.
Wow.
One of the beneficiaries, the Black family that owns this pot incubator, as it's called. Housed in a giant warehouse space in Los Angeles County, it's producing under brand names like Emerald Dreams. With marijuana lovers out of the closet and puffing in the open, legal weed has yet to deliver on its promises.
What would you say is the lesson so far from legal marijuana in California?
We had billions of dollars of growers, suppliers, distributors who are already working a system. And instead of saying, hey, let's lower the barriers to entry, keep taxes low, let's bring all this existing infrastructure, let's get as much tax revenue as we can from it, I think we pushed them out of the legal market because the barriers to entry were so high. And I think we made a big mistake in doing that.
But supporters vow to press for changes to keep the whole movement from going down as half-baked.
The Woodlawn Caballero Cemetery in the southwest part of Miami was
California revised its forecasted revenue from the pot excise tax downward by $222 million over 2 years to match the reality on the ground.